recent visit to the Philippines by Pope Francis has taken the country by storm, as millions of Filipinos troop to the streets to get a glimpse of the Catholic Church's Holy Father.
Primero de todo, soñar en una familia. No pierdan esta capacidad de soñar.
It is so important to dream, and to dream in the family. Please don't lose this ability to dream in this way.
His messages about family, the youth, and the country have mesmerized the skeptical world. In his watch, the state and the church continue to undergo massive ethical and financial reviews. He leads by example, and he refuses to live in the papal apartment and avoids regal clothes. During Easter, he included a Muslim woman and youth prisoners for the traditional foot washing. He also hugged a disfigured man. Some church supporters hailed his papacy as the dawn of a new day for a troubled Catholic Church, especially in his words about homosexuality, marriage, responsible parenthood, and other taboo issues, but some are not yet convinced. Is he truly transforming the Church? And is this really the man to galvanize millions of Catholics? Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. Pope Francis is called the Pope of many firsts. He is also known as the rock star Pope. Tonight, we'll re-examine the man who's taking the world by storm. We ask tonight, are Pope Francis's pronouncements revolutionizing the Catholic Church? Good evening, I'm Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. Joining us tonight in our discussion is Dr. Bernardo Cepeda, Campus Minister of Center for Lasallian Ministry. Good evening, Brother Ido. I'll call you Brother Ido. Yes, good evening.
Attorney.
Thank you for joining us tonight. What is your position on that question? Do you think that the Pope's pronouncements signals a revolution in the Catholic Church?
I think Pope Francis is a revolutionary in the sense that Jesus was revolutionary because he can effect change among the people he encounters.
All right. And on the opposing side is Red Tani, President of Filipino Freethinkers. Good evening, Red.
Good evening.
I won't call you a brother. I just call you Red. All right. What are your thoughts on that debate question? Do you think that Pope Francis's pronouncements makes him a revolutionary pope?
I think he's only revolutionary in the sense of his public relations, in the sense of his image. I leave it to Father Lombardi himself, who said that the greatest change that Pope Francis has brought to the Catholic Church is the reception of the message. As far as any great revolution, there is none.
There's none.
So these are the words of the spokesperson himself, and I don't think there's really any revolution happening.
All right. So we'll start off the discussion. First question to you, Brother Ido. In our primer, we showed the gestures of Pope Francis. No? That surprised many, including Catholics and of course, those who are not too, following Catholic precepts. Are these all new, or is this unique to Pope Francis?
Actually, Pope Francis was like that even before he became Pope. Even when he was still a priest, especially when he became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, his gestures are consistent.
All right.
He was pro-poor. In fact, the first pronouncement that he said when he was interviewed was, I am a bishop of a poor nation and I will be with them.
But you say it's unique to Pope Francis vis-a-vis, for example, his predecessor, Pope Benedict. You think this particular way of expressing the message is unique?
Actually,
and new?
Yeah, every pope is unique in a sense that they have their own way of expressing their message. It's just that right now, because of social media, all the more it is pronounced because you see it everywhere.
All right. So, you think he's a fresh
it's a fresh
start or restart or reboot in a way.
And the revolutionary label is actually a media mid label for Pope Francis.
He himself is not claiming to be...
in a sense, actually he said, I am a sinner.
Okay. All right. Red, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that this is all new? The things that he's doing and saying, do you think it's all new? Or we're getting lost in translation here, basically saying the same thing?
He's actually saying the same thing as far as doctrine is concerned, about the church's position on women, on LGBT individuals, on his actions on child abuse, which are lacking. I think these are all consistent with his predecessors. Again, what's different with Pope Francis is the style in which he does things, the way he says his messages, which sometimes tend to be ambiguous, which would leave some progressive interpretation. There's some room for interpretation as far as the progressives go. But a few days later, at most, Father Lombardi will come in to correct these misrepresentations.
But beyond the words, though, I mean, if you look at his actions, no, things like, he would not dress up in the same way as the usual garb of a pope, and then he's staying in kind of the guest room, no, not in the main a place where popes usually stay. These actions, beyond the words, do you think that he's changing things? He's kind of, I guess, shaking things up, and by shaking things up, is it a signal for some change during the Pope Francis era?
I think this is a calculated move by his PR team, led by Greg Burke, who was formerly from Fox News. He's been advised to do these things that would be very friendly to the media, which would lead social media to love him so much.
So you think it's calculated and it's really strategized? Now, okay, this is what you do. You check out yourself. Don't put the papal garb and all that. You think that this is all, I guess, PR manufactured?
I think there is some sincerity there. I think Pope Francis is sincere in the many things that he does. But as far as how this is being played up by the media, I think there's some consulting.
So there's
yeah.
There's no change. It's just the style. You think that's the case? You think that it's all for show in a way, and that he's not really a different styled pope?
Actually, it's not. Because remember, the Pope is the head of the magisterium. The magisterium comes from the Latin word magistra, teacher. Sa Tagalog, no, ang magistra ay guro. At napakaganda yung sinabi ni Cardinal Tagre. Ano ang guro? Para siyang karatula. Ang karatula ay taga-turo kung saan ang tamang daan.
Right.
Bilang pinuno ng simbahang Katoliko, napakaganda na ang ituturo, ang karatula na ipapakita ni Pope Francis ay yung tamang daan. Dito kayo tamang dapat dumaan. This is how you should go. This is where you should go. And remember, Pope Francis speaking to the whole Catholic community, not to the other than Catholics, to the Catholic community. If the message he is sending can affect change to other than Catholics, it's a grace from God. But basically, he is leading the Catholic faithful. And so I think the sincerity there is genuine.
Genuine.
No?
It's not
It's not a show. It's not
a show.
manufactured.
All right. Red, when Pope Francis sacked cardinals running the Vatican Bank, we heard about that.
Yes.
And then rebuked the Curia in his Christmas message. And basically giving the statement that I'm going to shake things up and I'm going to fire certain people and heads will roll. Are these enough to signal that he's really restructuring the church and there will be some change?
So the impression that a lot of people have is that it was his initiative to sack the 4 out of 5 officials of the Vatican Bank and so on. But the truth is, if you look beyond the headlines, he was forced to. He had no other choice. The Bank of Italy...
Forced by whom?
The Bank of Italy refused to deal with the Vatican. The ATM machines weren't working. They were losing money in the tens of thousands of dollars. So unless they followed the regulations, the international regulations on
it was
banking,
a business decision rather than a moral decision.
they had to. They were forced to. If it was really something that he was intent on doing, he would do it early, and he would not do it at a time when time has already run out for them. Because they had no other choice. And it's being played up by the media as him having some initiative, sacking these people, when that's the opposite. He's actually being a reactionary and not a revolutionary.
So, okay. Do you agree, Brother Aido? Do you think that yung mga changes, yung medyo pinagsasabihan niya yung mga Curia, di ba? Parang yung shape up, don't have lavish lifestyles and all that. Again, do you think that those are real signs of real change? Or do you think that, as Fred nga said, parang he's forced lang to do it because of the times?
Actually, ang una niyang ginawa, attorney, is to create a consultatory cardinal of 8.
Council of Cardinals.
Council of Cardinals of 8, coming from different continents.
Okay.
Sa simula pa lang, in his mind, I need to have a group of consultors, no, that can help me govern. No? And this is the first time it is being done by a pope. Because you have the Roman Curia.
Yeah.
And then here's Pope Francis coming up with this council of cardinals to help him decide on matters. In other words, it was not a reaction. It was actually part of his agenda to reform.
And he was the one organizing.
He was the
no one told him to organize it.
He was the one who chose the cardinals, and they came from different continents.
Do you think that the cardinals are kind of dictating on him rather than guiding him? Do you think that
Actually,
at least the way the church structured, this is like the council of elders, so to speak?
Okay. As a Jesuit, one of the most important values that he cherishes is discernment. And part of the discernment process in the Catholic Church is that you consult your fellow bishops. We call it to journey together. That's what synod means, to journey together. So he asked his fellow bishops, cardinals, to journey with him in the important matters pertaining to the governance of the church. For instance, the one mentioned by Tanya a while ago.
Red, you mentioned earlier that you think he's sincere. Do you think that he sincerely wants to change, but his hands are tied?
I think it could be both things. He could want to change, and the structure of the church itself is keeping him from enforcing the change.
Because of just the way the church is structured.
But he's not, his hands are not as tied as people think. He can do certain things, like what he did with the Vatican Bank, sacking 4 out of the 5 officials there. He also forced or accepted the resignation of the Bishop of Bling, that bishop who was
Bling, yes.
living in luxury. So he can fire people, he can make appointments, but he's not using this in a very progressive way. For example, there's a bishop of Uganda who made proclamations that it would be a blessing if their society was rid of all homosexuals. And he could fire that person, like whenever he wants to, but he does not. So these people who are really doing harm to individuals... He did not
because you think he agreed with the bishop, or you think that his hands are tied?
I think he could if he wanted to.
But he's afraid of the backlash?
From the conservative backlash. There are very progressive priests that he has excommunicated for their position on same-sex marriage. But these bishops, like the one in Uganda, Bishop Wamika, if I'm not mistaken, who's causing the genocide of so many LGBT individuals, are not being even scolded by Pope Francis.
Do you think in this case, a lot of people, and I've heard this in the commentary, and we'll discuss this probably more extensively after the break, but let's discuss about yung tone. People are saying that the message is the same, but it's just the tone that's different. Do you think it's beyond the tone, Brother Aido? Do you think it's beyond the tone and the attitude?
Actually, the message...
Do you think there's a substance change talaga?
There is, in a sense, that the substance of the main message, which is love and compassion, mercy and compassion, love of the poor. That's the main message from the start. From Jesus himself, that was the main message. Now, how it was articulated in the course of history and how it is being articulated by Pope Francis is different. And it has to be different. Because it has to be spoken to a particular community and to be understood by that particular community. And right now, Pope Francis is speaking to a generation that is media savvy, internet savvy, social media exposed. So how do you communicate the same measures of love and compassion to the present generation that they will understand that it is the same message that Jesus was preaching, but I'm doing it for you.
Okay. I'd like to delve on this topic a little bit more. Red, fortunately, we need to take a short break. Meanwhile, you can join the debate via Facebook at facebook.com/opposingviews on 9TV or tweet your thoughts at opposing_views. Use the hashtag #OVPopeFrancis. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. We have with us Dr. Bernardo Cepeda, Campus Minister of Center for Lasallian Ministry. And on the opposing side is Red Tani, President of Filipino Free Thinkers. Our debate question for tonight: are Pope Francis's pronouncements revolutionizing the Catholic Church? Just before the break, you're making a point, Aido, that it's not just the tone, but a lot of it has to do with substance as well. No? And it's key. It's important for the message to change as we go through the course of time, the course of history, right? And you said the message of Christ was mercy and compassion before. Sometimes it changes through the centuries, and now Pope Francis has, in a way, a different message or a unique message for this era. Do you agree, Red, on that statement by Aido that there's real substantial change in the message, especially when it comes to mercy and compassion in regards to social justice in this time and in era? Because there are obviously some issues on social justice, I guess, that were different during crisis time. No? But so do you think that there are changes that Pope Francis is saying?
I think that the message that would really make Pope Francis progressive is addressing minorities. You know, as Jesus said, like in the Bible, like what you do unto the least of your brothers, right? So minorities. So LGBT individuals are unfortunately left out of the message. Women are unfortunately left out. Even the poor, by keeping access to contraception and sex education from the poor, I think that's a bad message.
You think so? That you're saying that there's no change in the message; it's the same.
Yeah, the message is the same. The style is different.
Okay.
So when,
No
for
substantial
example,
change. No substantial.
Pope Francis won't wear his bigotry on his sleeve. He won't say something like, "I am against LGBT or same-sex marriage." He won't say it straight like that. He will say something like, "This is ideological colonization," or same-sex marriage is anthropological regression. So not so clear, but it's still the same thing. It's just the style that's different.
All right,
Yeah.
the delivery. No. Okay. I'm going to discuss now a now very famous 5 words, no, that Pope Francis said, "Who am I to judge?" No? That was the quote that he said when he was asked about, I think, homosexuals. No? You think that Pope Francis was misquoted when he told the homosexuals, "Who am I to judge?" You think there's a lot of misquote there? Because a lot of, I think, homosexuals felt that was a radical change in policy.
He was not misquoted. He actually said, "Who am I to judge?" But he was definitely misrepresented. So he was taken out of context is the proper thing.
Taken out of
like
context.
He was talking about this Monsignor Rica, who was fired for having homosexual relations, who had asked for forgiveness already. And what Pope Francis was saying was, if you ask for forgiveness, and then if you seek God, then who am I to judge? So he was referring to this one instance of a homosexual who had asked for forgiveness already.
So it was in reference of
It was in reference to one person who had already done something. It's not a blanket, who am I to judge, period. It is, who am I to judge someone who has already repented and is not performing homosexual acts anymore?
Okay. All right. Do you think, Aido, that statement, "Who am I to judge," was specifically for just that homosexual Monsignor, or do you think it's really for all?
Actually, it's programmatic of Pope Francis' view on love. No? That from the start, he believed that I am part of you. I am one with you. I am a sinner like you. And therefore, I cannot judge you based on what you're doing, because I myself need compassion, need mercy. And therefore, when he said, "Who am I to judge?" he was actually saying, we're all equal in the eyes of God. That's why his motto is, by mercy and by believing in God, that I will be saved also, just like you, just like all the other members of the community.
Now,
so it's programmatic for all the...
Okay, let's go to this synod. And again, we're touching on this LGBT issue and homosexuals and whether the church is really more open to homosexuals. The synod says we welcome homosexuals. Your thoughts on that?
We are actually. In fact, the church pronounced certain pastoral considerations for homosexuals, for the poor, for all the other sectors, the migrants, etc.
Do you think the church? Do you think the Pope is walking the talk there when he says we welcome the
I
homosexuals?
disagree with that. That was a hopeful statement that LGBT individuals have gifts that they can offer the community. It was in the initial wording of the synod, but it was taken out in the final release.
Translation, or you think it's lost
In the final release, it was taken out.
What did it say after the?
It wasn't there,
No,
and
actually,
they didn't address like what's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, that being a homosexual is inherently disordered and homosexual acts are always sinful.
Okay, your thoughts on
actually,
that?
If you're talking of the two synods that we're talking about, the 2014 and the 2015, actually there is now a pastoral consideration with regard to the issue of homosexuality, particularly in the context of the Catholic faith. In fact, that was one of the pastoral questions being asked of all the regions around the world, which will be used in the next synod in 2015. In other words, the church is now gathering responses from all the members of the faith community around the world that will be brought to the 2015.
So it's collaborative. They're asking for inputs and all that. And that's why you're saying it's changed.
It's changing, actually. The Pope is not just pronouncing something without consulting the community. And that's how the Catholic Church is going through.
PR move, do you think? Do you think it's a PR move?
I think so.
This collaboration thing, they're not really sincere?
They're preparing for this big event that would reinforce that a family should be between one man, one woman, and then the children. That's it. It's in preparation for this big event, like a council on the family that's happening, I think,
2015.
2015. So they will reiterate the same message, that the family is man, woman, and children. Like his other pronouncement, for example, on LGBT parents, is that allowing LGBT parents to adopt children would be discriminating against the child. So would someone
those are statements being made.
Yeah,
those are actual statements.
The National Catholic Reporter actually reported this.
Okay.
So statements like this, it really erases any effect that who am I to judge?
Now, I know that this particular issue, the homosexuality, LGBT, and morality and immorality, it actually deserves one whole episode altogether. So we can't delve too deeply into that. But let me ask you, I don't know, is Pope Francis, as well as the Church, do you think that they've been vague when it comes to controversial issues, or maybe they're kind of dribbling around the issue? Like, for example, are you satisfied in the statements or pronouncements made on the recent breeding like rabbits statement by the Pope? We shouldn't be breeding like rabbits. Homosexuality, same-sex marriage, divorce, atheists can be saved, women priests. Do you think that statements made by the Pope and then statements later on by Lombardi or by church officials kind of then muddles the issue? Or you think there's no clear pronouncement in those areas? Or do you think the church is quite clear?
Okay. First, there are pronouncements that are considered official, and there are pronouncements that are considered as a personal opinion of a particular bishop or a particular pope.
Okay.
Official pronouncements of the church are very clear about these issues. And again,
and that's in the catechism.
Yeah, not only the catechism of the Catholic Church, there are exhortations, there are congregations of the faith pastoral statements, there are encyclicals about them, and they are very clear. No? And we cannot enumerate all of them here. There are a lot of it, and again, the audience are the Catholic faithful, not the free thinkers, not the liberals, the Catholic faithful, because we need to guide the Catholic faithful who don't have access to this information.
Okay.
With regard to the opinions, and definitely that's where the gray area comes in. That's where
when
most
the balls are
of
thrown in the air.
And I think that's where debate should come in, and that is where this kind of discussion should come in, because these are statements that can be taken out of context. And they should not be made official pronouncements of the whole church. Remember, even Pope Francis said, when I refer to the church, I'm not referring to myself. I'm referring to the whole people of God.
People of God. Okay.
We belong to that. And everybody has a say on certain issues. That's why the consultation is so important, because he believes that after the consultation, then we can at least get a grasp get a feel of what's going on in the grassroots.
Now, do you think he's muddling the issue further by coming up with statements like this, would you rather that he was just, conservative the way the old popes were, and just stick to the script, so to speak?
I don't think he's the only person to blame. I think that the media is also to blame. They're playing up this image of a revolutionary rock star pope who's changing the Catholic Church, and the progressive Catholics around the world are
loving it.
too ready to to gobble that up. Like
if your
they
pope
love
appears
it.
in Rolling Stone magazine, that's something, right?
Yeah, they love it. But unfortunately, like I said, Father Lombardi would continue this pattern of correcting...
Douse water on the fire.
Yeah. He would say something like the one on atheists, where even atheists can go to heaven. That was clarified as, again, meaning that if you ask for forgiveness for being an atheist and then join the church, then you can go to heaven. So it's, it's a complete 180 on what's the headline that the media gives you and what Pope Francis actually said or actually meant.
But yes, go ahead, Aido.
But again, change cannot be an immediate or what we call instant change. For the Catholic Church, when we say change, we talk about metanoia. We talk about a real change of heart. And that's where revolution of St. Francis is coming in.
St. Francis?
Of Pope Francis.
Okay, you might be making a pronouncement here.
Prophetic.
Prophetic, okay.
What I mean is, it has to come from within each and every member of the whole community, the metanoia thing.
Yeah.
That's the revolution that Pope Francis is advocating, I think. No? And this is my personal opinion, that the metanoia that should happen in each and every one of us will actually revolutionize the whole church. It's not Pope Francis.
It's not just Pope Francis. It's the whole.
It's actually the whole church. That should
Do you think, Red, that the point of Aido here is that really when you talk about transformation, it's really just not one person? And
I would agree with that if the church were a democracy.
It's not.
If the 99% actually had some say on who the 1% were, then what he said would actually be valid. But the church as it is run now is an absolute monarchy. So it's a very top-down structure, little bottom-up government happening there, and little transparency as well. So no change as far as a democratic change can happen. I think that this survey is just really a token survey.
But the fact that the fact that he's having this collaborative statement, and even he would say things that popes never used to say, don't you think that in itself is a sign that there's iba yung ihip ng hangin, so to speak?
I think that you're right. Iba yung ihip ng hangin, the winds have certainly changed, and it's the very progressive society that's forcing the church to change, at first in terms of style. Now what I want, though, is for the Catholics to ask more than just style. There should be substance as well. And
more clear-cut pronouncements.
More clear-cut pronouncements.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, we need to take a short break. Keep tweeting and posting comments on our social media pages. More issues on the Catholic Church reforms after the break. You're watching Opposing Views. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Nepomuceno. Still with us is Dr. Bernardo Cepeda, Campus Minister of Center for Lasallian Ministry, and Red Tani, President of Filipino Free Thinkers. Our question, are Pope Francis's pronouncements revolutionizing the Catholic Church? Now, just before the break, Red was making a point that, yes, the winds of change seem to be there. Yung umiiba nga yung ihip ng hangin, as you mentioned, but you said that in the ideal world where there was a democracy, perhaps there could be possible changes in the church, but because the church is not a democracy, it's a monarchy, and I would say probably dictatorial in a way, that change can't happen. I know your thoughts on that.
If we're talking of a political entity, that may be true. But when we refer to the church, we refer to the people of God, the community. And as a community, we don't label ourselves as theocratic, democratic. We label ourselves as a community of believers. And as a community of believers, change is happening every day, regardless of who the Pope is. Because every day, the message of God is being pronounced by our leaders. even by our ordinary fellow member, it can affect change in me. But what Pope Francis is doing is his very person is actually making the change even more effective, because the change is actually happening in the level of the so-called leader.
Yeah.
So in other words, the thing is, it is now trickling down to the other members of the community.
You mentioned earlier that it's a community rather than, I mean, that the church can't be defined in a political sense, like democratic or autocratic. But the fact is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, he's also a head of state, right? And as such, to some extent, he is a politician, or is he not? Is he not conscious that he's a politician?
That I cannot answer. But one thing one I would like to say is, head of state of the Vatican. Remember, the Vatican is not the Catholic Church.
Okay.
The Vatican is a state.
That's an interesting point. A lot of people are confusing that. Okay.
The Vatican is not the Catholic Church.
Okay.
The Catholic Church is the community of faithful around the world.
Vatican is a country.
Vatican is a country. It's a state.
Okay.
So when he's in Vatican, he's the head of Vatican City.
But is there a confusion there? Because he's also the head of Vatican. Or maybe I'll ask Red about that. What are your thoughts on that? That the Vatican is not really the church.
So
and therefore there's, the fact that the Pope is possibly a politician himself and therefore has to say the right things.
It's like saying that the Philippines is not Malacanang. That is true. But the Catholic Church is run by the Vatican. They make the big decisions as far as doctrine as far as policies go. Now, as far as Pope Francis as a politician, he is definitely one.
You think he's conscious about it?
He is conscious about this.
No.
The Catholic Church...
You don't think so?
I don't think so. Because
okay.
right now, the decision-making of the church is collegial. There are decisions that can be done by local bishops that don't need the approval of Pope.
Yeah. Okay.
In other words, and that is
a diocese can decide by itself.
A diocese, and in fact, he's emphasizing that right now among the bishops. You don't have to go to me for you to decide on something that is specifically should be addressed at your level.
All right, you made your point. So why do you think he's a politician?
I think he's a politician. The most recent example was in December, Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama was asking for a meeting with Pope Francis. And Pope Francis declined because he had interests in China. He wanted to increase the influence of the Catholic Church in China, so he declined to meet the Dalai Lama.
Did he say the reason
and
why?
Archbishop Desmond Tutu was actually urging Pope Francis to meet with the Dalai Lama, but he did not. Because, like I said, there were very political reasons. He would antagonize China if he had a meeting with the Dalai Lama. If he welcomed,
there's a huge market for Catholicism.
there is a yes, definitely.
Okay. All right.
Actually, the reason, according to Pope Francis, is protocol. Actually,
as a state,
there are certain procedures that has to be done. But actually, he asked for an audience, and it was said that a date has to be set.
Do you think the fact that he's a political head as well of a state, that ties his hand in really, I guess, initiating real change? Because he has to work within the framework of a political head.
Actually, that's the gift of Pope Francis, the discernment thing. When can I use, or when will I use my political leverage, and when will I use my spiritual leverage? And I think that's where Pope Francis is good at. And that's where the media should pick up. Whenever he is acting, am I acting as a political figure? Am I acting as a spiritual leader? And I think that's where we need to distinguish whether or not the pronouncement or the action or the gesture is that of a political figure or a spiritual leader.
Now, the fact that he's a political head, Red, do you think that ties his hand and basically restricts him from being revolutionary because he's stuck with that title?
I don't think so. I think he can enforce change if he really wants to.
He really wants to, all right.
Like he can hire people, he can fire people, he can change administrative policy.
Which he's been doing, right?
Not enough. Like, for example, on the issue of clerical child abuse, like the policy of the Vatican to protect the abusers is still happening. Like he gave, for example, Cardinal Pell a position in the Vatican because he wanted to remove this person from being forced by the Australian Royal Commission to reveal the documents of the Catholic Church there. So there's also the case of Joseph Wesolowski, who's been, instead of being tried in the Dominican Republic, he was again recalled to Rome, where he will be tried in Rome instead of in the Dominican Republic. So these things are still happening, and he could change this kind of policy, but he's not.
All right.
Actually, he is. And,
He is, okay.
But the change has to be slow.
It's not happening
It's not
as fast.
as fast as
Would you rather that
yeah.
it's faster?
No, I think it has to be part of the process of discernment. It cannot just be an arbitrary decision that, well, because the world wants me to act on this immediately, then I will act on it immediately. That's not what Pope Francis is. And that's what the Catholic Church is all about. We need to go through a certain process.
Okay. When it comes to change, I think the most urgent one that most people are anticipating are changes on the policies with regard to LGBT. No? Now, after the recent synod on families that seemed to contain language friendly to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBT community. But the later versions of the document that came out, it came out without his statement now, we welcome LGBT. Does this mean that Pope Francis' stands are somewhat vague and don't translate to actions? I mean, he might say a statement that might be popular and might be received well by the masses, but later on, when the fine print comes out, the College of Bishops will basically say, let's remove that. Do you think that that's what's happening here? That he says the popular thing, but in the end, it's the same banana?
Actually, the pronouncement of the Synod of Bishops is a preparatory document for the 2015
So it's not a
Synod.
final document.
It's not the final document. In fact,
Why do you think they removed that? Why do you think they removed the we welcome homosexuals statement?
I don't think it was removed. I think it was stated in a more pastoral way.
Red, would you know the actual statement that was removed or supposedly
Yeah, the
removed?
statement had to do with homosexual or LGBT individuals having gifts that it could give to the church community.
Those were the exact
that language
of Pope Francis.
That language that was lauded by LGBT groups and individuals was not in the final document.
Okay, but initially it was.
Initially, it was leaked. I guess
it was leaked.
by progressive element. I don't know.
Okay.
Media or
May I quote?
So it wasn't official then at the time.
May I
no,
quote?
no.
Yes.
These the pastoral challenges of the family in the context of evangelization, which was released in 2014. In fact, this is a document that will be used for the Synod in 2015. It is stated here, nonetheless, according to the teaching of the Church, men and women with homosexual tendencies must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided.
All right. At that point, and I'll ask you to make a comment later on. We need to take a short break. Don't go away. When we come back, the final points of our guests and the results of our ongoing online poll on the issue. Stay tuned. You're watching Opposing Views. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Opposing Views. I'm Nepomuceno. Still with us, Dr. Bernardo Cepeda, Campus Minister of the Center for La Sallian Ministry, and Red Tani, President of the Filipino Free Thinkers. Our question, are Pope Francis's pronouncements revolutionizing the Catholic Church? Just before the break, Aido, you were pointing out a document, which I think is a document that's going to be used in the Synod of Bishops on families.
2015, yes.
And you made you said a quote, maybe perhaps for the audience, can you quote again the position of this paper with regards to the Church's position on homosexuals?
It's quoted from the considerations regarding proposals to give legal recognition to unions between homosexual persons. And it is stated here, nonetheless, according to the teaching of the Church, men and women with homosexual tendencies must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided.
All right. You think that that's a substantial change in itself, not just a tone, but I think there's a lot of meat in that statement, acceptance, and we should avoid any kind of discrimination. Again, that's different from the brimstone and fire and cast to hell all those people who are, I guess, homosexuals and doing homosexual acts. No? What are your thoughts on that?
So again, we have to look at the wider context of the church's position on LGBT individuals. They still believe that being a homosexual, you are inherently disordered, and that homosexual acts themselves are always wrong. So this causes the suffering and even the death as far as Uganda or countries like that are concerned. So this is not enough if they really want to...
What kind of statement would you want to hear, Red? I mean, or maybe not want to hear, but
Okay.
what would signal to you that, all right, there's an actual change here, there's a real change here?
Okay, they should do what they did with, as far as evolution or the Big Bang is concerned. They should listen to what science says. Science tells you that it is not a disorder to be an LGBT person. So to be in line with that, they should change their wording on homosexuality being a disorder or homosexual acts being sinful. So those are the kinds of changes that I want to see in the language.
Do you think they're going to be a bit stuck with that, considering that the Bible has certain references
Yes.
on that? Do you think that there's no way that that's going to happen?
I think that they will have to accept that they were wrong. And that's something that the Vatican never wants to do.
Do you think that that's the case? Do you think the Vatican always hates apologizing and admitting that it's wrong? I think no one likes that. But do you think that the church has restricted itself in apologizing, or do you think that they're doing just that?
I don't think we are restricting ourselves from apologizing. The church officially
Has
is
apologized
actually
everything.
apologetic
Yeah.
of all the things that we've done in the past. Slavery, you have the genocide. you know.
Sexual abuse
And I
and
think
all
it's part of the process. It's part of the healing process that we have to go through to really revolutionize the church. And I think Pope Francis is doing a great job doing that. You know, his message of mercy and compassion is actually on that aspect. No, we did a lot of things that in the past were considered right, but right now it's not because of the advent of sciences and anthropology, for instance, in the understanding of LGBT community. And right now in the document that I just mentioned, in fact, it is part of the discussion document to be reflected on, to be discerned during the 2015 Synod.
Right. Okay.
So I think this is a great opportunity for us to really look at
Open
how
our-
the church open
its
itself
doors and,
to the so-called minorities.
Now, Red, in your personal view, I know it's very hard to see the intentions of people, but do you think, or would you assume that this Pope is trying to genuinely move forward, but is just being held back by the conservatives?
I do not think so. I think that is a narrative that has served the church's purposes.
So you think that he genuinely doesn't really want to change? He's just...
First and foremost, he wants to save the church. The church is losing flock in Latin America, where they used to be like 90%. Now there's like 65% only. So they're losing people in the millions. And they want to maintain their hold in those places. They want to halt this progressive movement of society that are leaving the church, that are questioning the church. And this progressive face that is showing is serving that purpose, certainly.
To address the I guess, diminishing flock.
To address the diminishing flock and to correct the image of the church, which was really bad. After the child abuse scandals, after the Vatican financial scandals, after its treatment of LGBT and women, they wanted to change their image, and Pope Francis is certainly the person to change their image.
So so in that regard, would you then agree that he's revolutionary in that sense?
Yes, like I said in the beginning, in that sense, he has changed the public relations of the Catholic Church.
But in your position, Aidot, it's a substantial change. Hindi lang showing.
Yeah,
It's not a marketing ploy.
It's not a marketing ploy.
You don't
In
think
fact,
so? You think the church is willing to lose more followers just to stick to its position?
Yeah. Reformation happened. Many people left the church. The church continued to evangelize. The church continued to exist. Right now, we're losing a lot. We lost a lot of believers, but it's okay. Why? Because God moves in all those communities as well. My wife is no longer Catholic.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Inside our house, we have an interfaith dialogue every day.
That's interesting. All right.
Do I condemn my wife? No, because that is a religious experience, that is a spiritual enlightenment on her part, and I respect her for that.
All right.
And so the church is like that. We are being purified by the experiences that we go through every day. And Pope Francis is capitalizing on that. He's actually purifying the church right now. He is leading the purification.
Okay.
And his very message is actually purifying.
All right. And transformative,
And
as you were saying.
eventually, it will revolutionize
All
the
right.
church.
Now, in the coming years, Red, do you think that his papacy, during his papacy, do you expect some major changes, or do you think it's going to be same?
I really want to be proven wrong. I really want there to be substantial change, not just in terms of style, but substance. I want the church to change its policy and behavior on child abuse, on LGBT individuals.
Do you think there's a chance for that?
On women. I think there is a chance for
shot,
that. I'm rooting for actual change to happen. But as far as the evidence that we have so far, it's not enough. It's not enough.
You don't like the pace that
It's too slow.
It's too.
I think he's running out of time. The Catholic Church itself is running out of time.
Okay.
Change should happen, and as like the Vatican Bank example, they'll either change or they will be forced to change. So it's better for me if they change before they have to.
Either do you think there's going to be a lot of major change in doctrine or perhaps dogma? A lot of people are confused with what dogma is and doctrine, but do you think, let's stick to doctrine. Do you think there's going to be a change, major shifts during his papacy?
Change is always constant in our experience. No? And the Catholic Church changed across time, in history. No? We suffered a lot of changes. No? We experienced a lot of changes. And I think the church will change eventually. Will it
But
happen
there's
in the course of Pope Francis' lifetime? I don't know. I leave that to the mercy of God. I leave that to the grace of God. But the church has to change because the church has to be relevant to the community that we belong to. Again, the Pope's ministry is just one of the ministries in the Catholic Church. It is not the church. He is not the church. He's just one of the members of the church.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Now we only have a few minutes. Like I said, we can go on, but unfortunately, time is running out. So, Red, I'd like to ask you to please, inform our guests, our televiewers, on your position on this. Do you think that Pope Francis' pronouncements revolutionizing the Catholic Church is revolutionizing the Catholic Church? Your final thoughts and words.
So, like I said, I'm rooting for progressive Catholics. I'm rooting for real change to happen. What I'm worried about is that the Vatican will look at the reaction to what he's doing, and they will say to themselves, we changed our style, and it seems to be enough. We're not losing so many members anymore. We're getting as many or even more donations now. So why do we actually have to change our substance? I want progressive Catholics to be louder, to ask for more change, not just in style, but in substance as well. And if I could ask for just one thing, I want more people to be more informed about their faith, to read past the headlines, to read past the sound bites, and have discussions, interfaith dialogues, or even dialogue with people who do not have faiths.
Or these type of dialogues.
Yeah, to talk to free thinkers,
Right.
to embrace the possibility of change, because that's when true progress is possible.
All right, thanks so much. Red, Aido, your final words to our televiewers.
The Pope is revolutionizing the church by his witness, by his very person. And I think it's important for us not just to read the words, but to reflect on the words, to act on the words. Because the words spoken by the Pope are actually words that are inspired by Jesus himself, who became poor. And that's what he is telling us. Let's speak to the poor, because we are poor, because we are sinners. And as sinners, we need the grace of God. And because we need the grace of God, we should journey together. We should journey as a church. And I think by journeying together, we encounter fellow sinners who will help us be transformed as well by their gift, by their very person. In fact, that was what Pope Francis was moved by when he visited the the country. The gestures, not the words, the gestures of our Filipino brothers and sisters. The father who carried his son on his shoulder. The mother who brought her daughter. And the girl who cried. Gestures moved the Pope. The encounter moved the Pope. And I hope our encounter with the Pope moved us as well to change.
All right. Thanks so much. Thank you, sir. Thanks to our guest, Dr. Bernardo Cepeda, Campus Minister of Center for Lasallian Ministry, and of course, Red Tani, President of Filipino Free Thinkers. Now let's see the results of our online poll. We ask you, are Pope Francis's pronouncements revolutionizing the Catholic Church? Those who answered yes, 65%, and those who answered no, 35%. And that's our opposing views for tonight. Tune in again next week for another bold and engaging discussion on today's most relevant issues. I'm Nepomuceno. Good night. God bless. Happy weekend. I guess, following Catholic precepts. Are these all new, or is this unique to Pope Francis?
Actually, Pope Francis was like that even before he became Pope. Even when he was still a priest, especially when he became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, his gestures are consistent.
All right.
He was pro-poor. In fact, the first pronouncement that he said when he was interviewed was, I am a bishop of a poor nation, and I will be with them.
But do you say it's unique to Pope Francis vis-a-vis, for example, his predecessor, Pope Benedict? You think this particular way of expressing the message is unique and new?
Yeah, every pope is unique in a sense that they have their own way of expressing their message. It's just that right now, because of social media, all the more it is pronounced because you see it everywhere.
All right. So, you think he's a fresh
he's a fresh
start or restart or reboot in a way.
And the revolutionary label is actually a media made label for Pope Francis.
He himself is not claiming
in a sense, actually he said, I am a sinner.
Okay. All right. Red, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that this is all new? The things that he's doing and saying, do you think it's all new, or we're getting lost in translation here, basically saying the same thing?
He's actually saying the same thing as far as doctrine is concerned, about the church's position on women, on LGBT individuals, on his actions on child abuse, which are lacking. I think these are all consistent with his predecessors. Again, what's different with Pope Francis is the style in which he does things, the way he says his messages, which sometimes tend to be
The recent visit to the Philippines by Pope Francis has taken the country by storm, as millions of Filipinos troop to the streets to get a glimpse of the Catholic Church's Holy Father.
Primero de todo, soñar en una familia. No pierdan esta capacidad de soñar.
It is so important to dream, and to dream in the family. Please don't lose this ability to dream in this way.
His messages about family, the youth, and the country have mesmerized the skeptical world. In his watch, the state and the church continue to undergo massive ethical and financial reviews. He leads by example, and he refuses to live in the papal apartment and avoids regal clothes. During Easter, he included a Muslim woman and youth prisoners for the traditional foot washing. He also hugged a disfigured man. Some church supporters hailed his papacy as the dawn of a new day for a troubled Catholic Church, especially in his words about homosexuality, marriage, responsible parenthood, and other taboo issues, but some are not yet convinced. Is he truly transforming the church? And is this really the man to galvanize millions of Catholics? Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. Pope Francis is called the Pope of many firsts. He is also known as the rock star Pope. Tonight, we'll re-examine
ambiguous, which would leave some progressive interpretation. There's some room for interpretation as far as the progressives go. But a few days later, at most, Father Lombardi will come in to correct these misrepresentations.
But beyond the words, though, I mean, if you look at his actions, no, things like, he would not dress up in the same way as the usual garb of a pope, and then he's staying in kind of the guest room, no, not in the main place where popes usually stay. These actions, beyond the words, do you think that he's changing things? He's kind of I guess shaking things up, and by shaking things up, is it a signal for some change during the Pope Francis era?
I think this is a calculated move by his PR team, led by Greg Burke, who was formerly from Fox News. He's been advised to do these things that would be very friendly to the media, which would lead social media to love him so much.
So you think it's calculated and it's really strategized? Now, okay, this is what you do. You check out yourself. Don't put the papal garb and all that. You think that this is all, I guess, PR manufactured?
I think there is some sincerity there. I think Pope Francis is sincere in the many things that he does. But as far as how this is being played up by the media, I think there's some consulting.
So there's
yeah.
There's no change. It's just the style. You think that's the case? You think that it's all for show in a way, and that he's not really a different styled pope?
Actually, it's not. Because remember, the Pope is the head of the magisterium. The magisterium comes from the Latin word magistra, teacher. Sa Tagalog, no, ang magistra ay guro. At napakaganda yung sinabi ni Cardinal Tagre. Ano ang guro? Para siyang karatula. Ang karatula ay taga-turo kung saan ang tamang daan. Bilang pinuno ng simbahang Katoliko, napakaganda na ang ituturo, ang karatula na ipapakita ni Pope Francis ay yung tamang daan. Dito kayo tamang dapat dumaan. This is how you should go. This is where you should go. And remember, Pope Francis speaking to the whole Catholic community, not to the other than Catholics, to the Catholic community. If the message he is sending can effect change to other than Catholics, it's a grace from God. But basically, he is leading the Catholic faithful. And so I think the sincerity there is genuine.
Genuine.
No?
It's not
It's not a show. It's not
a show.
manufactured.
All right. Red, when Pope Francis sacked cardinals running the Vatican Bank, we heard about that.
Yes.
And then rebuked the Curia in his Christmas message. And basically giving the statement that I'm going to shake things up and I'm going to fire certain people and heads will roll. Are these enough to signal that he's really restructuring the church and there will be some change?
So the impression that a lot of people have is that it was his initiative to sack the 4 out of 5 officials of the Vatican Bank and so on. But the truth is, if you look beyond the headlines, he was forced to. He had no other choice. The Bank of Italy...
Forced by whom?
The Bank of Italy refused to deal with the Vatican. The ATM machines weren't working. They were losing money in the tens of thousands of dollars. So unless they followed the regulations, the international regulations on
it was
banking,
a business decision rather than a moral decision.
they had to. They were forced to. If it was really something that he was intent on doing, he would do it early, and he would not do it at a time when time has...
I mean, the man who's taking the world by storm. We ask tonight, are Pope Francis's pronouncements revolutionizing the Catholic Church? Good evening, I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. Joining us tonight in our discussion is Dr. Bernardo Cepeda, Campus Minister of Center for Lasallian Ministry. Good evening, Brother Aido. I'll call you Brother Aido. Yes,
Good evening, Attorney.
Thank you for joining us tonight. What is your position on that question? Do you think that the Pope's pronouncements signals a revolution in the Catholic Church?
I think Pope Francis is a revolutionary in the sense that Jesus was revolutionary because he can effect change among the people he encounters.
All right. All right. And on the opposing side is Red Tani, president of Filipino Freethinkers. Good evening, Red.
Good evening.
I won't call you a brother. I just call you Red. All right. What are your thoughts on that debate question? Do you think that Pope Francis's pronouncements makes him a revolutionary pope?
I think he's only revolutionary in the sense of his public relations, in the sense of his image. I leave it to Father Lombardi himself, who said that the greatest change that Pope Francis has brought to the Catholic Church is the reception of the message. As far as any great revolution, there is none.
There's none.
So these are the words of the spokesperson himself, and I don't think there's really any revolution happening.
All right. So we'll start off the discussion. First question to you, Brother Aido. In our primer, we showed the gestures of Pope Francis. No? That surprised many, including Catholics and, of course, those who are not too